Picture this. You open a wooden box in your kitchen. Inside is a piece of meat that has been sitting there for 3 days. No fridge, no freezer, no little light that turns on when you open the door. And yet, you pick it up, you cook it, you eat it, and you don't die. That wasn't a horror movie. That was Tuesday for roughly 99% of human history. We tend to think refrigeration is just one of those background conveniences like electricity or Wi-Fi that quietly makes modern life possible. But here's the strange part. Humans have been eating meat, dairy, and vegetables for hundreds of thousands of years, and the fridge has only existed for about a century. So the real question isn't how do we keep food fresh? It's how did billions of people across thousands of years avoid poisoning themselves at dinner without a single compressor or ice cube tray? The answer involves salt mines, underground caves, exploding ships full of ice, a very determined Frenchman, and a myth about spices that refuses to die, no matter how many times historians correct it. Stick around, because some of these methods are still hiding in your kitchen right now, and you probably didn't even notice. Let's start with the obvious one, because it's everywhere, and it's older than written history itself: salt. Salt doesn't just make food taste better, it bullies bacteria to death. Or more precisely, it pulls water out of bacterial cells through a process called osmosis, and without water, bacteria can't multiply. No multiplying bacteria means no spoilage. Ancient Egyptians used salt to preserve fish along the Nile. The Romans built entire trade routes around it. In fact, some historians believe the word salary comes from Roman soldiers occasionally being paid in salt, because that's how valuable it was. Not gold, not silver, salt. A seasoning we now leave sitting in a shaker, ignored, was once considered payment worth fighting over. But salting meat for weeks turns it into something closer to jerky than dinner. Eventually, people wanted variety, so they invented smoking. Smoking meat does two things at once, and this is where it gets clever. The heat slowly cooks and dries the meat, removing the moisture bacteria need to survive, and the smoke itself contains natural compounds that act like a chemical shield against decay. Indigenous communities across North America turned this into an art form with foods like pemmican, a mixture of dried meat, fat, and berries that could last for years without spoiling and without a single refrigerator in sight. Some pemmican reportedly stayed edible for over a decade. Try leaving a sandwich out for 10 years and see how that goes. Then there's fermentation, which sounds fancy, but really just means controlled rotting that we've agreed to call delicious. Sauerkraut, kimchi, yogurt, cheese, wine, beer. All of these exist because certain bacteria, the good kind, produce acids or alcohol that make it nearly impossible for the bad kind of bacteria to survive. It's basically microscopic gang warfare, and we just eat whichever side wins. Cabbage left in salty water shouldn't last long, but add the right bacteria and it can last for months, becoming more flavorful the longer it sits. Chinese laborers building the Great Wall reportedly ate fermented cabbage as a staple food thousands of years ago. The same basic principle centuries later gave the world sauerkraut in Europe and kimchi in Korea. Different continents, different spices, same bacterial trick. Now here's a myth we need to bust immediately because it refuses to die. You've probably heard that medieval Europeans used spices to mask the taste of rotten meat. It sounds believable. It's repeated constantly online. It is also almost certainly false. Historians studying medieval trade records point out something simple. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, and nutmeg were incredibly expensive, often more costly than the meat itself. Nobody spends a fortune disguising food that's already spoiled. Wealthy households used spices to show off status, much like driving an expensive car today. Meanwhile, actual food preservation was handled by salting, smoking, drying, and something even older than spices, the ground itself. Long before iceboxes existed, people realized that if you dig deep enough into the earth, the temperature stays cool and stable no matter what season it is outside. This gave us root cellars, underground rooms dug beside or beneath homes where families stored potatoes, carrots, apples, and cabbages for months. No electricity, no machinery, just dirt doing what dirt does best, which is staying consistently cold and slightly smug about it. But cool soil could only get you so far. What people really wanted was actual ice year-round, even in the middle of summer. And that obsession led to one of the strangest industries in history. In the early 1800s, a wealthy but eccentric Bostonian named Frederick Tudor became convinced he could make a fortune selling frozen lake water to people who had never even seen snow. Everyone thought he was insane. Ice shipped across oceans to tropical countries before refrigeration existed. What could possibly go wrong?
A lot, actually. His first shipment to the Caribbean in 1806 partially melted before it even reached the dock. Investors mocked him. Newspapers called it a joke. But Tudor refined his methods, insulating the ice in sawdust, and eventually built an empire nicknamed the Ice King business, exporting frozen New England ponds to places as far away as India. By the mid-1800s, ice houses were being built across major cities, storing blocks cut from frozen lakes in winter to be sold throughout the summer heat. Something we now get instantly from a freezer door used to require ice cutters with saws floating on frozen lakes in the dead of winter, risking their lives to harvest something we now barely think twice about. And this changes everything about how we should picture the past. It wasn't primitive, it was industrial, just built from ice, sawdust, and questionable insurance policies. Still, ice houses and root cellars were regional. They depended on climate and geography. What the world actually needed was a way to preserve food that worked anywhere for anyone, regardless of the weather outside. And the breakthrough came from an unexpected place, a cash prize offered by Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1795, the French military was struggling. Soldiers on long campaigns kept getting sick, not from enemy fire, but from spoiled food. Napoleon reportedly offered a large cash reward to anyone who could invent a reliable method of preserving food for his armies. A French confectioner named Nicolas Appert spent over a decade experimenting. Eventually, he discovered that sealing food inside glass jars, then heating them, prevented spoilage for astonishingly long periods. Nobody understood why it worked yet. Germ theory hadn't even been discovered. Appert had accidentally invented modern canning almost 50 years before scientists could even explain the microscopic reason it worked. He was killing bacteria with heat without knowing bacteria caused spoilage in the first place. Sometimes the solution arrives before the explanation. This method quickly evolved from glass jars to metal cans, spreading across Europe and eventually the world. Suddenly, meat, vegetables, and soups could last for years, sealed inside metal cylinders, immune to time itself. Canned food became essential for soldiers, sailors, and explorers heading into environments where nothing fresh could survive the journey. But here's the twist almost nobody expects. For decades, nobody had a reliable can opener. Cans were originally sealed so tightly that soldiers were sometimes issued instructions to open them using a hammer and chisel, or in some documented cases, a bayonet. The can opener as we know it wasn't patented until decades after canned food became widespread. Humanity had solved long-term food preservation and then briefly forgotten to solve the much simpler problem of how to actually get inside the can without a small workout beforehand. By the late 1800s, all of these older methods, salt, smoke, fermentation, root cellars, and ice houses, were about to collide with a new invention that would make most of them unnecessary: mechanical refrigeration. Early refrigeration machines used dangerous chemicals like ammonia and sulfur dioxide and occasionally leaked, which is a fairly terrifying sentence when you consider these machines were being installed in people's homes.
Early adopters were essentially trusting a metal box filled with toxic gas to keep their milk cold and hoping for the best. It wasn't until the 1920s and 30s that safer refrigerants made home refrigerators practical, transforming kitchens across the world within a single generation. And that's the part that should genuinely astonish you. For nearly all of human history, keeping food fresh required salt mines, smoke pits, underground cellars, floating blocks of lake ice shipped across oceans, and a Frenchman locked in a decade-long science experiment funded by a war. Then, within about 100 years, all of it was replaced by a quiet white box that hums in the corner of your kitchen and that most people never think about until it breaks. We often imagine progress as something slow and gradual, one small improvement stacked on another. But food preservation tells a different story. Thousands of years of clever, hard-won, occasionally strange solutions, followed by one invention so effective that it made almost all of them obsolete within a single human lifetime. So, the next time you open your fridge without thinking, picture the alternative timeline. Salt-caked meat drying in smoke, cabbage fermenting quietly in barrels, ice cutters risking frozen lakes with hand saws, a Frenchman staring at sealed glass jars, convinced he'd stumbled onto something important without any idea why it worked. All of that history compressed into the 10 seconds it takes you to reach for a cold drink. If stories like this make you see everyday objects a little differently, stick around because the next one might change how you look at something else you use without thinking every single day.